Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Kevin Rudd. I'm President of the Asia Society again. It's great to have such a gathering of folks here to celebrate remarkable literary achievements. It's great to see Isabel Schell here. Great to see the team from Asia Society. And great to see the enormous work which has been done so successfully by China Book Review. And so I've actually, this afternoon, picked up my 2026 edition, and it's fantastic. It's beautifully laid out. The articles are fun and extraordinarily well crafted, and the reviews are of world standard. So for those of you who haven't read your China Book Review, read it, follow it, subscribe, pay Orville lots of money, and then put a 0 on the end of that, because this particular project is worth getting behind. So thank you so much for joining us today for the second awards ceremony for the Baifang Schell Book Prize. I remember Baifang, and I know how close these partners for life were together, Orville and Baifang. And it is wonderful to see Baifang's memory being honoured through something which I know Baifang would have appreciated herself, given the excellence that we are celebrating here this evening. This annual prize at Asia Society was founded in 2025 to celebrate exceptional book-length works on or from China and the Sinophone world, published in English. There are two $10,000 awards in nonfiction and in literature categories. Overall, the award seeks to recognise and promote excellence in books that deepen understanding of the complexities of the region. Through original reporting, incisive analysis, compelling narrative, and literary excellence. We see this as part of our broader work here at Asia Society to bridge cultural divides, foster deep engagement, and facilitate the spread of ideas and knowledge across borders and languages. Our mission statement here at Asia Society is navigating shared futures. Navigating is a hard business. Identifying where those futures can be shared is critical. And understanding that futures are in the plural and not just the singular is equally important. We're in the business of navigating shared futures. And the work done with China Book Review and the work we're doing here this evening, celebrating works of excellence, is entirely consistent with our mission statement. We hope that in honouring these books, we contribute to a deeper mutual understanding between the English-speaking and Chinese-speaking worlds. We also aspire to encourage future work at a time when that understanding is more needed than ever. The Baifang Schell Book Prize is named in honour of Liu Baifang Schell, the late wife of Orville Schell, who is Arthur Ross, Director of the U.S China Centre here at Asia Society. Lovely to see you, Mrs. Ross. Baifang Schell passed away in 2021 after spending her life working to advance U.S China relations. We certainly hope that this book prize helps her memory and the spirit of her work to live on. For this year's awards, considering books published in 2025, we invited two independent juries. We do things seriously here at Asia Society, composed of respected writers, scholars and experts on China, to choose the winners in each category, from a wide field of titles nominated by publishers and nominated also by the general public. These juries read more than 80 nominated titles between them, winnowing each award category down to a short list of 5 books before selecting the winners and the honourable mentions. The winners that the jury selected and the books that we are celebrating today are, I feel like a drum roll for the Academy Awards. I can't hear the drum roll. For the non-fiction category, Barbara Demick for Daughters of the Bamboo Grove, From China to America, a true story of abduction and adoption and separated twins, published by Random House. Congratulations, Barbara. For the literature category, Fang Fang and her translator, Michael Berry, for The Running Flame, a novel published by Columbia University Press. Congratulations. We're delighted to have Barbara Demick and Michael Berry with us today to accept their awards. In just a moment, you'll get to hear them talk about their books in consecutive panels moderated by a judge from each of the juries. Before we get to that, a few notes of thanks first. To all and all who have participated in our juries, thank you for the work. It requires a lot of reading and a lot of application. On the non-fiction jury, Isabel Hilton, Yang Chung, Andy Nathan, Jeffrey Wasserstrom, and Edward Wong. On the literature jury, Perry Link, Eric Abrahamson, Jiayang Fan, R.F. Kwang, and Megan Walsh. Thank you. We're also grateful to our generous supporters at Open Society Foundation and to Janet Ross for helping to make all of this possible. Thanks to both of them. Thank you also to everyone at the Centre on U.S China Relations here at Asia Society who worked on this event and the prize, especially the team at China Books Review who administer it. As I indicated before, China Books Review is a digital magazine founded in 2023 by Asia Society in partnership with The Wire China, a business magazine and data platform for whose support we are also deeply grateful. China Books Review publishes reviews, essays, excerpts, book lists and more all about China and the Sinophone world. And we'd encourage you all to follow the magazine online at chinabooksreview.com to find your next read. So folks, to tell you more about the program itself, let me welcome Alec Ash, editor of China Books Review and author of 2 books about China himself, to come to the podium. Thank you all for your attendance here this evening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rad, for being here and for those kind words of introduction. You, of course, have also written 2 books about China yourself. Unfortunately, we can't give the award to ourselves. But finally, thank you to everyone for being here tonight. Hopefully not too bleary-eyed after watching the Knicks last night. And I want to echo the words of thanks to Open Society Foundations, to Janet Ross. I also want to add personal thanks to the whole team who worked on this prize and on the review. Hu Yiqing, Jeffrey Sequeira, Alexander Boyd, and Liu Yi. Special thanks to David Barboza, who is the force behind The Wire China magazine and The Wire Digital, which co-publishes China Books Review. And, of course, to Orville Schell, who founded China Books Review with David. And Orville has written over 10 books on China, so too many to count. The prize, of course, is named in honor of his late wife, Baifang Schell. She loved to read, I know. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Baifang had read The Running Flame in its original Chinese edition. And the point of the prize is really to lift up Sinophone voices to the attention of the Anglophone world. And so we hope that that cultivating that mutual understanding and empathy between China and the West, which was very much part of Baifang's mission in life, is a mission and a spirit which we endeavor to continue with our work here at Asia Society. Of course, China Books Review is a digital magazine, but on each of your seats you will have, hot off the press, our yearly print edition, which is a selection of some of our best articles from the last year. So please do flip through. There's a QR code at the start to scan to follow online. And then at the back, we have the full titles of the shortlisted books. And our newest feature, a game called Match the Book, where you're meant to guess which line comes from which of the shortlisted books. You can also play online at chinabooksreview.com/game. Our newest feature just dropped. Onwards with the prize, for which I am your MC tonight. This is the second year of the prize, as Dr. Rudd noted. The non-fiction winner of the first year is here with us in the audience, Ed Wong, who wrote At the Edge of Empire. And the fiction winner that year was Taiwan Travelogue, which just won the Booker Award, thereby confirming the rectitude of our jury's decision. for this year, we were considering books published in 2025, published in English. And so from the end of last year to this spring, our Stakhanovite jury, or maybe Baifang spirit is the more appropriate metaphor, they read and looked at over 80 titles to come up with the winners. We had 2 juries, 2 categories, and so tonight we're going to have 2 mini panels of 20 minutes each to introduce the winners and the books, with the author and translator of the winning titles, with a chance for some audience questions, and then at around 7:30, 7:40, we'll have a hot buffet and wine in the back and a reception, and we invite you all to join us and mingle and get your book signed. So let's begin with the awarding of the Nonfiction Prize, the award for Outstanding Nonfiction Book on China or the Sinophone world. I'd like to mention the honorable mentions first. There was a short list of 5. 2 honorable mentions went to I Deliver Parcels in Beijing by Huan Yan, translated by Jack Hargreaves, and Let Only Red Flowers Bloom, Identity and Belonging in Xi Jinping's China by Emily Feng. But the winner, as you all know, is of course Barbara Demick's book, Daughters of the Bamboo Grove. It's a wonderful book. We accepted it, and we had Barbara for an event as well. It's a riveting story of 2 twins separated in infancy, which explores the effects of one-child policy and the adoption market. The jury, in awarding the book with the top slot, said, quote, "In Daughters of the Bamboo Grove, Barbara Demick exposes child trafficking and corruption in China's brutal one-child policy and the international adoption market through the extraordinary story of twins separated as infants. A deeply moving human drama set against a backdrop of cruelty, redeemed by enduring love." So, we have Barbara with us, and we also have the chair of that jury, Isabel Hilton, an author and broadcaster focused on China herself, to talk to Barbara about the book. But first, let me invite Isabel and Barbara up on stage to present the award. Please join me in another round of applause.
Well done. Thank you very much. Congratulations. This is very heavy.
Well, good evening, everyone. Wonderful to see you. It's great to be at this culminating moment of this process. I just wanted to add my thanks, actually, to the team of Alex and Alexander and his colleagues, who really took all the administrative burden of this prize and therefore left us to the reading and the discussion, and my fellow judges, who made it all such a pleasure. Book juries are not always harmonious, but I have to say this one, we got to the end, I think, still friends, and that was wonderful. It was, of course, there are tears along the way. People get attached to it. This was a very, very strong year. We had a very strong long list. We had an even stronger short list, and you know, that is the job. It's arriving at a winner. And what were we looking for? We were looking for a book that was well written, a book that would tell us something new about China, a book that would be, above all, accessible to a general reader, someone who wasn't, you know, necessarily a China geek like most of the jury were. Barbara, your book, I don't need to tell you this, but I mean, it couldn't be more Shakespearean. You know, the story of twins, you know, one ripped untimely from her family, a cruel state policy, and as we said, redeemed by profound human emotion, attachment, love, and all put together with very good research. maybe a bit of journalistic luck along the way, if you don't mind me saying so, because it was an extraordinary set of circumstances that led you to the story. And then you put it together in this narrative, which is completely compelling. So congratulations. I mean, it really was, it is a wonderful book, and you're a very, very worthy winner. So we're all very delighted about that. And I just wanted, for the sake of people who haven't read it yet, this story starts in 2009 in a very difficult to reach village in Hunan. Just tell us how you came across this, how you encountered this story in the first place.
Yes. Thank you for your kind words, and I have to start off by saying thank you. This is a very special honor because I know members of the jury, and I know they're very serious people. This is a heavy award, and these people are hunlihai, and as they say, and all speak better Chinese than I do. So it's really it's a very special award. This started in 2009 when I was a reporter for the Los Angeles Times in Beijing, and we were hearing these stories about babies who were confiscated by family planning officials from families who were too poor to pay the fines for violating the one-child policy. And I went out to investigate these stories, sort of hiking up goat paths and crossing rice paddies, and went to this very obscure, remote village in Hunan. Village is called Baifang, and met a mom and a 9-year-old girl. They told me how this girl had an identical twin sister who was taken away, and that was the beginning. I mean, I can keep on going on, but this was as you said, it was a multi-part project over the years.
And you remarkably, you found the twin at that point.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until much later that you had the second round of the story. And that, I think, was one of the things that made the book so special. So
amazingly, I did find the twin. This was the whole story is really, this could be a book about social media, but I found the twin on a Yahoo site. She had been adopted by evangelical Christians in Texas the family wanted nothing to do with me. And years later, this really is the second round. They contacted me and said, can you help? Can you help get these twins in touch?
Because she wanted to rediscover her family. Yeah. And if this was Disney, it would be, swelling music and bluebirds. But, it was a resolution, but it wasn't entirely it wasn't a fairy tale, was it?
No, it's not a fairy tale, and it's interesting because many adoptees are looking for their birth families, and this one worked out well. It really worked out well, but it was not a family. It was not a fairy tale, and in some cases they've been kind of disasters.
How do they feel about each other now? Because they don't really have a language in common.
They don't have a language in common, and they communicate really over WeChat through emojis and photos. And, they had during the reunion, which you can read about, it was very warm, very emotional, very physical. I mean, there's a physicality between twins that was recreated, but it's not really kept up. And we had, or they had intended, I getting ahead of myself, I traveled with the adoptee back to the village in Hunan during Lunar New Year, and this was 2019, and there was a plan for the Chinese twin to come to the U.S., but we all know what happened in 2020, and it didn't happen.
I'm going to ask you to do a short reading. We are very short of time in this session, but would you read us a passage and just tell us briefly what you're going to read?
I'll set this up. I mean, I think you're all familiar with the one-child policy, but the cruelty in the village level was really unbelievable. And as long as I had been working in China, I was shocked by the stories I heard. There were, in this particular area of Hunan, which was, by the way, very close to a village, a county called Daosheng, that had terrible massacres during the Cultural Revolution. But really awful things happened. Women who were 9 months pregnant were hogtied, dragged out, forced to abort. People were sterilized. People who couldn't pay the fines had their houses demolished, vandalized. They were beaten up, and it was just unbelievable, some of what happened. And so this is a very short passage that's in context to what I found in the atmosphere in Baifang. Of all the tentacles of the Chinese Communist Party, this was the one that most impacted the lives of the people in Baifang village. Nothing else impinged so intimately on personal freedom. They weren't concerned about censorship. They didn't have a television or radio. They didn't read newspapers. They weren't looking for freedom to travel abroad, which they couldn't have afforded anyway. They had too little money to worry about taxes. They were not among the Chinese who were clamoring for democracy, as in 1989, the year that demonstrations at Tiananmen Square led to a brutal crackdown. They wanted the government to stay away and let them live their lives without interference. Family planning was the intrusion that they most loathed. This was the new face of oppression in rural China.
I think, that puts the cruelty very clearly. I hadn't realized until I read your book that this was also a massive revenue-raising project, raising money from the poorest in many cases.
Exactly. And I think you all know China well. In wealthier towns, they would sell land, there would be development, but this was the money-making operation that kept these small towns, small counties in rural China afloat. And, it was sort of said that they would allow these excess births because then they could get the really big fines. And they were, extorting money from these very poor people who would, have to go do migrant work in order to pay the fines, further breaking up the families. And it was just this whole cycle that really, I think, destroyed family life in these villages.
Can I just ask you, before we go to the audience, what do you think you learned in the course of this about China and the United States? I mean, you have this extraordinary experiment.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, in some ways, this is like, you said it's Shakespearean, but one might say this is like, like a cheap trope. All these like separated twins stories, separated at birth. What is it, like the Parent Trap and all this nonsense. But I did see these twins and their families as sort of this unusual aperture into China and the U.S. And there's this whole section in the end, comparing the life of the twin who stayed behind with the twin in the U.S. And there was, this assumption with, our sense of American exceptionalism that, well, the twin in the U.S. is so lucky, she must be quite wealthy. But, it turned out that I concluded that the Chinese family was probably better off than the American family. The American family had been marginally middle class, and they, because of the usual illness, not quite enough health insurance, not quite enough pension, had sort of slipped out of the middle class. And this indigent Chinese family on a mountaintop in the 20 years
had ridden the boom.
Ridden the boom, and I mean, they weren't wealthy, but they, everybody was working and they had their land. And so, I thought it was a very interesting perspective on the U.S. and China.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is a roving microphone. We will go on talking if you don't give us questions, but I'm sure you have questions for Barbara. So raise your hand, or we could go on talking. Well, while you think about it, but we don't have much time, but we will go on talking. One of the, I guess, the gifts of this story, that you had this perspective of the 20 years in between the first encounter and then the second encounter with the children, then young adults. And the fact that you can't restore the damage that was done to this family, that the twins that were separated will never be intimate. They may feel connected. I also think, and I really would like your view on this, that there is a kind of long-term damage to Chinese society from this policy, from those years of the one-child policy. The actual devastation of families in China and the idea of the family in China at a time when it was also being attacked by migration, by, by left behind children, by all of that. As you look at it now, as you went back to look at it, what do you think the long-term effect on Chinese society is?
Many scholars think that the one-child policy was as devastating as the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. I don't know if I agree with that, but it has a very long half-life. I mean, just on the national level, China has this declining population. It's supposed to drop in half by the end of the century, and there's many reasons. I mean, there's not enough women of childbearing age. There's urbanization, educated women, but it's also, we were talking about how the family structure was destroyed by the policy. There were a lot of things that destroyed it. The lack of hukou for migrant workers who couldn't bring their children to the cities, but I think a lot of young Chinese have such bad memories of their childhood, of being left behind children, that they don't want to have kids. And I will say in this family, Shuangjie, the Chinese twin, is not married at 25. Good for her. Does not want to be married. Her sisters, she has two older sisters who married quite young, and she's like, nope. I saw what it's like, and I don't want to do it. And it's a very damaged society, and there's no there's nobody is apologizing. And I also think a lot of there's like damage and all little psychological damage in all these families. The boys who know that they were born at the expense of their sisters and may not be able to find wives. And the girls who were, felt shunted by society, and these parents who either gave up their children or whose children were taken away. And I never say abandoned, I say relinquished, because I think most of those girls who were abandoned, probably, not all, but would not have been abandoned without the one-child policy. And these parents have these nightmares, and I've met many of them who are wondering what happened to babies they gave up. And, there's a lot of heartbreak there.
Is there any evidence either of resistance at the grassroots level, as we might say here, or internal dissent at higher levels to the one-child policy?
In terms of grassroots dissent, yes. And from the passage that I read earlier, family planning was loathed. They were really loathed. I mean, I remember doing a story in Shandong, in a town where a woman had died from a forced abortion, and I'm pro-choice, but this was like a 9-month forced abortion, and I interviewed people at this general store, and they were like swearing about the family planning officials. And I remember a guy who, I said, don't worry, I'm not going to use your name. And he said, oh no, use my name. I'm not afraid of them. And he took my notebook and wrote down the characters. People had gotten very gutsy. This was 2012, and they really were resisting. In this case of the twin, there was a petition drive that got picked up by journalists. At the higher levels, I don't know what went into the decision to relax the policy. I know that for years, demographers were warning that this is a disaster. It was a disaster in terms of demographics, but in terms of, did not create what the Chinese Communist Party wanted, which is harmonious society, to the contrary. But I don't know, I don't know what that thinking was. And Baifang, who wrote a book about the one-child policy, has said the surprise is not that it happened, but it lasted as long as it did.
Yeah. One last question, and we've run out of time. I'm sorry, please.
Thank you so much. Quick question. If you recall the film, The Official Story, the Argentine film from the mid-'80s, that was about children that were abducted. And in this case, the junta and friends of the junta were able to obtain horrifically these disappeared children. I'm wondering, in the case of China, would it have been possible for the twin to actually have gone into somebody who wields power's home?
No.
Was there any class of people?
No,
not at all.
No, it's a different. I know the story, and there's a wonderful book about it. A flower traveled in my blood, but it's a different situation. The Chinese government wanted those kids out of China to lower the population numbers, and they wanted the money that came from the international adoption.
And I'm so sorry, but we have run out of time. Please join me in one more warm round of applause for Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabel and Barbara. A depressing subject, but as the jury noted, redeemed by a reunion of siblings and love between them, and a real human story at the heart of it. Do pick up a copy of the book. It's just out in paperback. We're now going to move from this reported story of abduction and adoption in the 1990s to a fictional treatment of a real-life case of domestic abuse and murder, also taking place in the 1990s and centered around themes of gender and the countryside. This is, of course, our Fiction Prize, the award for outstanding literature on or from China or the Sinophone world. Again, the jury had their work cut out from them, reading, I think, scores of novels in translation and some novels originally in English to whittle it down to 5. They picked 2 honorable mentions: Time Tunnel, stories and essays by Eileen Chang, translated by Karen Kingsbury and Jie Zhang, and Hunter by Shuangxue Tao, translated by Jeremy Tiang, who was in the audience. The winner that they chose was, of course, The Running Flame by Fang Fang, a Chinese writer of both fiction and non-fiction, best known in the West, of course, for her 2020 book, Wuhan Diary, chronicling the first months of the COVID pandemic in her hometown. But she's also written several novels, 2 of which came out in English last year, both of which made it to our shortlist: Soft Burial, about violence of the land reform movement in the 50s, and the winning title, The Running Flame, focused on more recent gendered violence in the 1990s. So we're going to hear all about that in just a moment. Fang Fang, as you probably noticed, is unable to attend. She very much wanted to be here in person with us, but unfortunately was not able to come to New York due to forces outside of her control. But we do have her translator here, Michael Berry, who is Professor of Contemporary Chinese Cultural Studies at UCLA and an author himself of Translation, Disinformation, and Wuhan Diary, which gives some context. Michael was going to be in conversation with Jiayang Fan, the New Yorker staff writer, who was on our jury for the prize, but Jiayang is having an emergency root canal, I think as we speak. She's heavily anesthetized, and we wouldn't want her handing over the prize with half a smile. So we wish her the best, and I'm going to be pinch hitting for her and moderating this one myself. So I spent a very long lunch break today reading the book, which was an absolute delight because it's completely gripping, and I burned right through it. We're also delighted to have a special guest with us tonight to accept the award in Fang Fang's stead, one of Fang Fang's closest friends here in the U.S., Zhang Hongling, who is herself a writer and literary translator of Wang Xiaobo and other authors. And she indeed helped to introduce Fang Fang to Michael Berry for the translation of Soft Burial. So Fang Fang has written an acceptance speech for the award, which Hongling will read for us at the podium before joining me and Michael to talk more about the book. But first, let me invite Michael Berry and Zhang Hongling in Fang Fang's stead to accept the awards, and please give them a hearty round of applause as they do so.
Could you hold up your voice?
Let's together.
I've known both Fang Fang and Michael Berry for many years, and I've had the rare privilege of witnessing their collaboration unfold, across time, across languages, and throughout some very difficult time. What has stayed with me most is their commitment to literature and to the work itself. Through everything, and they just kept writing, translating, and moving forward. So it feels, especially meaningful to see the running flame recognized in this way. And I think the 2025 Baifang Schell Book Prize couldn't be more well-deserved. So now, please allow me to read Fang Fang's acceptance speech. I'm deeply honored that my novel, The Running Flame, has received the 2025 Baifang Schell Book Prize. Unfortunately, due to various reasons, I'm unable to attend the ceremony in person. I have therefore asked my friend and a junior schoolmate at Wuhan University, Mrs. Hongling, to accept the award and deliver these remarks on my behalf. First, I would like to thank China Book Review and the Baifang Schell Book Prize for their support of literature, the judges for their recognition of my work. I would also like to express my gratitude to the translator, Professor Michael Berry, and for his dedicated efforts in bringing this novel into English. And of course, my thanks go to all readers who continue to care about Chinese literature. The Running Flame tells the story of a rural Chinese woman whose greatest wish is to own a house of her own. In pursuit of this dream, she tries many different ways, some bold, some foolish, and some that openly challenge the social order upheld by traditional society. Yet she presses on fearlessly, determined to live on her own terms, under the heavy weight of old traditions that still burden rural China. Fulfilling such a wish is far from easy. She resists, she makes mistakes, and in the end, she pays a devastating price. The story was inspired by an interview I conducted in a prison in northern China. More than 20 years have passed, yet I still remember the expression on that woman's face as she told me her story. And there was bitterness, confusion, and above all, helplessness. One sentence she said has stayed with me ever since. I have never had a home. It should be said that since the reform and opening up, the lives of women in China had undergone tremendous changes. However, many rural women are still struggling for dignity and control over their own destinies. They still need attention. They still need voices to speak out for them. I hope that through this award, more readers will come to know the running flame and pay attention to the lives and the struggles of these women. And that would give this recognition even greater meaning. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Hongling. Before we get into the novel, I thought we could draw out more about Fang Fang's life and work. And Hongling, let me start with you. As you mentioned, you were junior schoolmates with Fang Fang. Could you tell us?
Yeah, we lived in the same like a girls' dormitory for a year, and I think that was 1981, long time ago. And she was about to graduate, and I just entered the university. And then in 1981, one of her short stories won the best short story in China. So, all the girls in the dorm, we got very excited, right? We just asked, who is Fang Fang? Who is Fang Fang? And then I think one time someone, identified her for me. So, that's Fang Fang. So ever since then, I just, there's one more thing, that we were also in the same literary group, student organization. However, she was already famous, so she didn't participate in our group too much. She was very, very busy. But, she was sort of a very, almost like a model for someone like me. I was in love with literature. But I was in law school, so I was trying to get into that circle. So, yeah, that's our relationship started.
And as you mentioned, she became quite famous and really somewhat a hometown hero of Wuhan.
Yeah.
And you watched her literary star rise. What were the early novels that she was writing that you read?
Okay, so I think, I don't know, do you know how to translate that story? 大篷车上. Yeah, but that story is about, Fang Fang had a very different experience than from us. We just went from school to school, right? From high school to college. But she actually worked as a 搬运工, how do you say that? Like a loader or mover, with like a heavy product. How heavy, how do you say that?
Right, a mover, 搬运工.
Yeah, 搬运工, yes, mover. So that was like a men's job. She worked as a 搬运工, a mover, for many years. So she really knew the ordinary people's lives. And so that short story is about, actually a worker's, mover's life. And I think we were very surprised to learn that, as a college student, and she really, pick up those local dialects, rough dialects very well.
So from the height of her fame, she's now become more a sensitive figure in China, somewhat controversial, especially after the publication of Wuhan Diary, which originally was, of course, her own blog and Weibo postings. Michael, you wrote a whole book about this. Could you roughly outline this next chapter in her story?
Yeah, so she became, a kind of a representative writer in China starting in the 80s, especially for the city of Wuhan. She lived her entire life after the age of 1 in the city, and many of her novels portray that city. They're set in the city, both historically and contemporary fiction. So she became kind of the most identifiable writer with this city of Wuhan over the course of her career. And she also ascended the literary ranks. She was the head of the Hubei Writers Association, and so she was in very good terms during portions of her career with the authorities. But when COVID broke out, she started writing a blog on Chinese social media, which went viral and was read by, most people estimate, hundreds of millions of people, and had an incredible impact during the early days of the COVID lockdown. It was kind of the go-to clearinghouse for many people to understand the thoughts, the fears, the, even practical things like how do you get food, how do you, do these health QR codes, all of the typical things that people were figuring out, basic information about the disease. She was kind of the go-to place for so many people. However, she also didn't shy away from being critical of various policies and missteps that took place during that period. And for that, an online disinformation campaign was launched, and it was quite massive. It was protracted, went on for nearly 3 years, where she and I were getting daily death threats, attacks. Various sectors of society were mobilized in this. And so she went overnight from being the conscience of Wuhan, the voice of China, that's the way the global media was positioning her, to all of a sudden being this kind of persona non grata. And she, from that point on, faced a very difficult time in terms of publishing her work, finding platforms to be able to speak. One thing that's remarkable about her is she continued to speak out. She continued to post even when her accounts would be shut down. There were relay accounts that people were creating for her, so her diary could still get out there. And she kept pushing back. She continued to chronicle across the entirety of the COVID lockdown. Her diary lasts 60 days. And that also gave her a certain amount of global, there was a kind of bifurcation that takes place. Globally, she becomes embraced as this hero, but within China, she's very much demonized by the authorities for speaking out.
Right, we know her best outside the Wuhan Diary, but she had a whole and hugely successful career as a novelist in China before. So let's talk about The Running Flame, which was published in Chinese in 2001, 奔跑的火光, and was, I believe, a great commercial success, and even won a couple of awards in China. We're now giving it this award 25 years later because we consider books published in English, and the English translation of Running Flame and Soft Burial, Mai, another 2016 novel of hers, just came out last year from Columbia University Press. Why did it take so long to publish it in English?
Well, I think there's a couple practical reasons. That there's a very vibrant literary scene in China, and there's just innumerable, incredible stories that are out there just waiting to be translated, waiting to be told, waiting to be discovered. And at least when I started my career as a translator, 30 years ago, there were only a very small handful of professional literary translators working in from Chinese into English. Today there's a lot more, but still there's a kind of bottleneck because there's so much untranslated work. And also, English language publishers haven't had that great an interest in publishing Chinese fiction. The first novel I translated when I was a senior in college was 活着, To Live by Yu Hua. That took, I think, 7 years to finally find a home and get published. And so things have improved a bit since those cold days, but still I think there wasn't a great interest in not just Chinese literature, but translated literature in general for the English language publishing market. That's one issue. And also after the debacle with Wuhan Diary, it felt like the world only identified Fang Fang as the author of this diary. And I thought it was really important for people to see that, no, there's a whole other side of her as this incredibly creative and vibrant and brave writer. And I thought it was important not to have the literary side of who she is buried by that controversy. And so it felt even more important to go back and translate more of her literary works. Ironically, actually, my relationship with Hongling and Fang Fang began with her novel Soft Burial. I think back in 2018, Hongling reached out to me to 2019. Okay, my interest in possibly translating Soft Burial. And that's what I started working on. And then when the pandemic broke out, I kind of put things on hold and we shifted gears because it seemed so timely and important what she was writing in 2020 with the pandemic. But it was very important for me to go back to Soft Burial, go back to other works, and then The Running Flame seemed like a really important work of hers that had been received great critical acclaim in China, but again, it was unknown in the West. And I think that's one way to keep her voice alive, especially as her voice has been kind of snuffed out in the Chinese literary space in China, to try to make sure that that vibrant voice still rings internationally. And, yeah.
Well, we're late to the party, but it really is such a riveting read. I was locked in the staff break room reading it today and just enraptured, engrossed, because it's such a compelling story which brings you along with it. It opens with the protagonist, a young woman from the countryside, Yingzhi, who is in prison for the murder of her husband. And it's a frame narrative. She then tells her story, and then at the end, I think it's not too much of a spoiler to say that she is executed for the crime. Perhaps we could fill in what's in the middle, and one of you could give just a very brief potted summary of what Yingzhi did, why she did it, and what that tells us about China at that time.
Maybe you go first. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, one thing is really important is the context, which is the late 90s. And the 90s was a period where Chinese society was completely swept up in the raging economic reforms. This is after Deng Xiaoping's Southern tour, and to get rich is glorious. Everyone is willing to do whatever they can to improve their economic situation. And the protagonist of this novel is a young woman who's very much caught up in the materialism that's kind of sweeping the imagination, kind of global popular culture, and seeing new fashions, new material desires that are available that were not available just several years earlier. And so one thing the novel does is navigate that craze towards money in the 90s with how it collides with the tradition of, we call, 重男轻女, this tradition of putting more emphasis on males rather than females, and gender discrimination, which is deeply ingrained in kind of the Confucian tradition and Chinese history. And when those two forces come together and collide, this is the kind of tragic fate that eventually unfolds. And so she starts her life in a song and dance troupe and starts realizing that she can make some extra money by letting some men cop a feel or give these sexual favors. It starts very mild and kind of builds up. And she's able to make a lot more money doing that than her traditional role as a performer in this song and dance troupe. And that, of course, is going to have an incredibly detrimental impact on her marriage. Her husband is also a chronic gambler, and all of this kind of comes together and plays out in a way where a circle of violence starts to unfold. And again, although it's based on a real life story from 25 plus years ago, I think one of the reasons that hopefully it resonates, or maybe unfortunately, is because these types of stories are still playing out today in different ways.
And she's really trapped in that marriage because she's just a teenager and she gets pregnant, and then she realizes that she has been essentially trapped in a marriage where she's has to attend to the every whim of her tyrannical in-laws, and her husband Gui Qing is a layabout who's off gambling all the money she earns away on mahjong every night, and she dreams of building a house where she could have a little bit of peace and quiet. And it just was a crushing experience to read that dream sort of disappear in the face of realities of life for women in the countryside, and how they were treated really like property by the in-laws and by her husband. And she endures domestic violence and abuse. So it seems like a sort of litany of horrors for her.
Yeah, and part of, I think, in Hongling's speech that Fang Fang wrote that she read, that sentence that I have no home, that the real life model for this story said, very much plays out in the life of this protagonist, because before marriage, she's under her parents' roof, who are looking at her as this woman who doesn't really belong to the family because eventually she's going to marry off and belong to someone else. And of course, when she does marry off, this new family also doesn't look at her as a real integral part of the family, but as a kind of second-class citizen. And so she's caught between these two tensions, between her parents' family and her husband's family. And part of this dream of wanting to build a house is kind of this dream of finally having a space of her own where she can be autonomous and she can have dignity. And of course, that dream is never realized.
And it comes to violence at the end. Hongling, what was your experience reading it in Chinese?
As I told you earlier, I didn't really, I didn't really read this book before I learned about this prize because, I introduced the soft barrel to Michael, and I really liked that novel. So when I heard about this prize, I immediately thought, must be the soft barrel, but actually it turned out it's The Running Flame that I hadn't read yet. So I tried to find that book online because, in China, most Chinese books you can find online. But I couldn't because it was banned. So I actually asked Fang Fang myself, whether she could send me a copy, and she did. She sent me a copy of like a Word document. So I read that. I think so first, as someone who came from Wuhan, even though I didn't really live in the rural Hubei, but I just feel like the character just feels very familiar to me. And also the time era, like the 90s. I mean, I left China in 1993, so just get a little bit of taste of what was coming. But I just feel like, the scene, the scenes and the characters, they just feel very familiar to me. And also the dialogues, right? They speak a local Hubei dialect. But I guess I have a little bit like complex feeling about this character because, she's not really 100% abused wife, right? She did a lot of stupid things, and she tried very hard. She was ambitious, and she really wanted to make her life for herself, which is nothing wrong. But, on the other hand, she was not just abused wife, right? So I just feel like part of me is like sympathetic to her, but the other part, I just feel like in real life, where I really like someone like her. So I don't know, that's my feeling, yeah.
And on that, maybe a last question. Has, in your understanding, have conditions improved for women in the countryside? It's such an indictment of the experience of being young women in China in the 1990s. This book was published in 2001, and I think it took until 2016 for China to finally get a domestic violence law on the books. As you mentioned, Michael, in your translator's note, the horror tales keep coming. In 2022, there was a big online furor when pictures emerged of a rural woman, likely a trafficked bride, who was discovered in a shed in the countryside with a chain around her neck. Xiao Huamei, the Tielian Yu, the chained woman. So to both of you, or whomever wants to chime in, what's changed now? Has anything changed from the writing of this novel to today?
So I'm not texting, I promise you. I did an interview with Fang Fang, and I actually asked her specifically this question, so that's what I was pulling up. And I think maybe since Fang Fang can't be here with us, maybe the best thing we can do is hear from her on that question. Would you like to do the honor of reading?
You want to read the 3 paragraphs?
Yeah, I may as well read the whole response.
So this is Fang Fang's words. The fate of Chinese women must be discussed separate for urban and rural areas. In cities, women are generally independent, and their lifestyles and mindsets have become quite similar to those of women in Western countries. The key reason for this is that urban women have greater access to education and a higher level of schooling. However, in rural areas, the pace of change for women has been much slower. The main reason, again, is the lower level of education. It's a complex issue with multiple contributing factors. In addition to the deeply ingrained preference for sons over daughters, 重男轻女, poverty plays a significant role. Many farming families struggle financially, and when resources are limited, they prioritize the education of boys over girls. Although rural women today are in far better position than in Yingzhi's time, they are still undergoing a process of transformation. Cases like the chained woman and the broader issue of rural women suffering abuse while villages turn a blind eye are still not uncommon. The traditional preference for sons has persisted in China for too long, and how much longer it will take for rural women to fully break free from this circle, I truly don't know. And one thing that always struck me for Fang Fang is she just always has a deep concern about the social social condition of the poor or the woman. She has been like this way since the very early time. So.
Wonderful. We have 2 roving mics if anyone has a question. Maybe while... Yes, Yuan Li.
Hi. I want to ask, one is, how is Fang Fang? If you could, maybe Hongling, you can update us, whether she's still writing, what she's writing. And the second question is, The Running Flame was published in China in 2001. And now it's banned. I checked, I can't find it on Chinese internet. And also recently there's a movie about a woman who was on the death row, and that film was pulled after protests from the public. I'm just wondering, maybe from both of you, I'm just wondering, can we still expect anything really good, really decent, really wonderful from Chinese fictions, films in today's China?
Okay. I really didn't ask about her writing, right now, because it's sort of kind of sensitive, right? Because she's banned in China. So I got a sense. I mean, one of her books was published in Taiwan last year. So I was very excited when I asked her, I said, you got a new book come out. And then she told me, she said, well, it's actually an old book. But since you couldn't get published in China, so she got that published in Taiwan. And I feel like she traveled a lot. And also, I think what's interesting about Fang Fang is, in life, she's actually very casual. She likes to joke, and for sometimes I even feel like, I said, he just doesn't look like someone who would write, those kind of, those books that are so tragic and, deep, right? But, when I did an interview with both Fang Fang and you, as soon as she saw those questions that were asking about, the deeper level, and she just totally changed. So that's my impression. Sorry.
Yeah, and I've been in regular touch with her, and she keeps a good spirit. She's a tough fighter, and she keeps pushing back in ways she can push back. But I think those ways are limited, and that's kind of also tied to your second question about what we can expect in terms of literary and cinematic works right now in China. Those of us who follow those fields do see a strong retraction of the space that writers and filmmakers are able to operate in and able to express themselves with. So it is getting harder. Topics that you could freely publish about a decade ago now would be considered sensitive. And so that is something I think everybody acknowledges. There are writers who still kind of push back and find fissures or cracks through which they can shine some light. And I think there's still every once in a while an incredible film or a novel that will come out. I saw Bigan's Resurrection last year, which completely blew me away, and a film like that is still able to be made and distributed. At the same time, or more recently, another trilogy I translated was Han Song's Hospital Trilogy, a very strange, dystopian, violent world of the whole universe as this massive hospital where everyone is a patient. And that's a kind of also you could read as a political allegory. That was able to be published in 2016, 2017, 2018. I don't think it could be published today. So even just in these short couple of years, things have retracted quite a lot.
One more question. Let me take the... Oh, Janet, please.
Just quickly, I wonder what made her so sensitive at a young age to these things. What made her so sensitive at a young age to these things? She was fairly privileged, I gather.
I don't. Can you say that again? Sorry.
Why was Fang Fang so sensitive to the suffering of undertrodden people from such
That's
a
a good question.
young age?
Yeah. I think it might have a lot to do with her family background. I think her father or parents were definitely persecuted during the Cultural Revolution. And also, I think, I didn't read recently, but my impression is starting from a very young age, and she began to work really hard and make a living to support her family or her brother. That I'm not quite sure, but I have an impression that so she has been really close to the the really ordinary people in China. So that's I don't know if
and she even has a famous quote from one of her books that the barometer of a society's status is how they treat their most vulnerable group. And so throughout her literary body of work, you can just see this real, not only a sympathy, but a willingness to stand up and fight for those downtrodden individuals, whether it's in the Running Flame, victims of sexual violence, or whether it's Soft Burial, which are victims of political movements, like in this case, the land reform movement, or Wuhan Diary, when so many people were suffering during the lockdowns of COVID-19. And so it kind of traverses different historical periods, different time frames, and different modes of violence and trauma, but she seems to naturally gravitate towards those kind of topics and wants to champion those individuals who have suffered during these times.
And we should note that the novel was based, as you mentioned, on the real-life case of Dong Junhui, a young Chinese rural woman who was sentenced to death in 1999 for murdering her husband in exactly the same way, by lighting him on fire, as happens in the novel. And Fang Fang interviewed Dong Junhui in prison for a Chinese TV show called 13 Murders, which aired. So this novel is really based on her conversations with Dong Junhui and the creative liberties thereon. So.
Yeah, it's a fascinating process that this is in, the actual murder happened in 1999, and in 2001, she was hired by a television studio, a director named Gao Chunshu, who's quite well known as a film director, and today is a film director. Back then, he was a TV director. But she went to prison. She interviewed death row inmates. She worked on some of the screenplays, but I think she handed a lot of the script writing over to other collaborators. But then she also took that material and fictionalized it and published 4 separate novels based on these different interviews, and fictionalized them and shifted them in different ways. For The Running Flame, I think the biggest shift was she moved it from northern China to Wuhan, so she could include all of this kind of local color and dialect, which was not there in the original story. She also included elements of Chinese opera and these traveling song and dance troupes, which was not in the original, because that was something she had some personal experience with. And so each of the stories she kind of completely reimagined for this kind of, it's a fascinating story. So there's the actual stories, which you can go online and learn about what happened. There's the television docudrama, which kind of sensationalized it. And then there's also Fang Fang's fictional renditions.
Great. Well, start with the novel. It's available for purchase outside. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today for the main program.
Before we break, if you don't mind, I want to just take 1 second to express my thanks, to you, to the jury members, Asia Society, everyone who behind the scenes who put this together, the Schell family. Also, I'm very fortunate. I usually don't bring my family to these types of events, but my children, my mother are actually here, so I want to thank them for their support. Leslie Kriesel is here from Columbia University Press. We've worked on, I think, 10 books together over the years, starting with my first book in the late 90s. And so I'm so moved that she is here in Columbia University Press for all of their support. And Hongling, of course, who introduced me to Fang Fang. And then the last person I need to thank, of course, is the one who should be here the most of all, which is Fang Fang herself, because I wanted nothing more than to see her in person and see her present here. And I hope somehow she feels our energy, but I've learned so much from her over the course of the last couple of years collaborating with her on these books, and not just from a literary sense, but just what it means to have kind of moral integrity for the kind of work that we do as writers, scholars, translators. And when you're standing within the maelstrom and the winds are blowing, and she's someone who stood firm and has really become a kind of model for me to aspire to. And so I just want to pay tribute to Fang Fang and my regret that she is not with us here today.
Yeah, I want to add one more thing. I think it's when she decided to conclude her Wuhan diaries, and she said, I think she quoted a line from the Bible. She said, "I've fought the battle, and now is time for me to retreat or rest." Right? I forgot the exact lines, but I feel like I was deeply touched by that line.
Wonderful. Well, we can raise a glass in Fang Fang's absence tonight. Please do stick around and join us at the reception for the book prize in the back rooms. We have wine, iced tea, hot buffet, where we can celebrate all of the work that we've been discussing tonight. And before I see you there, please join me in a round of applause for Michael, Hongling, Fang Fang, Barbara Demick, and Isabel Hilton.